The scent of antiseptic is a ghost that clings to your skin. No matter how many times I scrub, under water so hot it turns my hands pink, that sharp, clean smell of the hospital lingers. It's the perfume of long hours and exhaustion. Tonight, it mingled with the crisp October air as I finally turned the key in my cottage door. The metal was cold, so cold it bit into my fingertips. My hands were trembling, not from the chill, but from the day, from him. "Mama's home, sweet pea," I whispered into the dark hallway. The words felt heavy. Mrs. Henderson from next door would have put my little Layla to bed hours ago. The silence that greeted me was a living thing, a deep, breathless quiet broken only by the steady, heartbeat rhythm of my grandmother's old mantel clock. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I could almost hear her voice, frail but firm from my childhood. "Time is a river, Amara. You can't stop it, but you must choose which bank to stand on. This clock will remind you to choose wisely." I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood there in the dark, leaning against the door, letting the familiar shapes of our living room soothe the ragged edges of my nerves. Layla's tiny sneakers by the sofa, a picture she drew for me, a bright sun with a lopsided smile taped to the wall, our small, imperfect kingdom, built by my 2 hands alone. Being a single mother at 28 wasn't the plan. The plan had love and partnership and security. The plan evaporated when Leo decided fatherhood was a suit that didn't fit him, leaving when Layla was still a baby. Now my world was 12-hour nursing shifts at Pine Ridge General and the constant gnawing arithmetic of bills. The latest stack sat on the kitchen counter, a pale monument in the moonlight. I winced and looked away, my gaze falling on the chipped mug I'd left by the sink this morning. My shift had been haunted by Mr. Thorne, Alistair Thorne. The name alone made my shoulders tense. He'd been admitted with horrific injuries, 3 parallel gashes across his torso, deep enough to see muscle, clean as a surgeon's cut, but savage as a beast's. He'd claimed a logging accident. I didn't believe him for a second. There was nothing accidental about those wounds. And his eyes, when I'd cleaned them, my fingers steady despite the gruesome sight, he'd watched me, not with the glassy pain of a trauma patient, but with a sharp, unsettling amber focus, like a predator assessing its environment. Most people flinch or look away from such intimate, painful care. He didn't. He just watched. "You have no fear in your touch," he'd said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in my chest, not my ears. I'd just concentrated on my stitches, making them neat and tight. "It's my job, Mr. Thorne." "It's more than that," he'd murmured, and for a fleeting second, his hand, large and startlingly warm, had closed over my wrist, not to stop me, just to hold. I'd felt a tremor run through him, not from pain, from something else, something that looked impossibly like relief. The other nurses whispered about him, of course, the reclusive owner of the vast Blackwood estate that bordered the northern forests, the man no one in town really knew. The forests themselves had a name, the Whispering Woods. Parents told tales to keep children from wandering too deep, tales of shapes in the dark, and howls that didn't sound like any ordinary wolf. I'd always dismissed them as charming local folklore. Tonight, after meeting Alistair Thorne's gaze, the stories felt less like fiction and more like a warning I'd failed to heed. A hot shower washed the hospital from my skin, but not the memory of him from my mind. The mirror showed a woman with blonde hair escaping a messy bun, shadows like bruises under blue eyes that had seen too much worry too young. A mother's eyes. I checked on Layla. She was a small, peaceful mound under her quilt, her chest rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of untroubled sleep. Her inhaler sat on the nightstand, a sentinel. I kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her, crayons and sleep and innocence. My brave girl, Mama will always keep you safe. Back in the kitchen, I noticed the envelope. Thick, expensive paper, my name, Amara Reed, scrawled across the front in elegant, bold handwriting. My heart did a strange, hopeful little leap before suspicion crushed it. No one sent me fancy mail. Inside was a check. The amount made the room tilt. It was more money than I made in 4 months, enough to erase the medical debt from Layla's bad winter, enough to fix the car, enough to breathe without that constant financial weight on my chest. A note was paperclipped to it. For your discretion and exceptional care, the nature of my accident must remain between us. A. Thorne. Discretion. The word felt cold. What was I being paid to forget? The impossible neatness of the wounds? The unnatural heat of his skin? The way the deepest gash seemed to have already knitted together at the edges by the time he was discharged, a process that should have taken weeks? Relief and dread warred in my gut. This money was a miracle, but miracles, in my experience, always came with strings. I sat at the table, the check lying before me like a sleeping serpent, beautiful and dangerous. I must have dozed off because the sound jerked me from a fitful sleep. A scratch, then another, at the back door. Not the tentative scrabble of a branch, but something deliberate, something pleading. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed the fireplace poker from its stand, the solid weight of iron in my hand a poor comfort. The scratching came again, followed by a low, pained whine. It was the sound of an animal in terrible distress. Every sensible instinct screamed to call the police, to stay locked inside. But another instinct, deeper and older, pulled me forward. The one that made me a nurse, the one that couldn't ignore suffering. I flipped the lock and opened the door a crack. The porch light fell on the largest wolf I had ever seen. Its fur was the color of a moonless midnight, a black so deep it seemed to swallow the light. And its eyes, they glowed with a familiar, unsettling amber, Alistair Thorne's eyes. Blood matted the sleek fur along his ribcage, dark and wet. A gunshot wound, fresh. As our gazes locked, I saw no animal aggression. I saw intelligence. I saw pain. And I saw a desperate, silent plea. I should have slammed the door. I should have screamed. Instead, I heard my own voice, calm and steady as it was in a hospital crisis. "You're hurt." I stepped back, holding the door open wide. "Come inside." And to my everlasting shock, the massive, bleeding wolf limped past me into my kitchen, leaving a trail of crimson paw prints on the linoleum. The world seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the wolf's ragged panting and the inexorable tick-tock of my grandmother's clock. I moved slowly, gathering my first aid kit from under the sink, my nurse's training operating on pure autopilot. When I turned back, the air in the center of my kitchen was shimmering, like heat rising off asphalt. A strange golden light pulsed once, twice, and the wolf was gone. In its place, naked and bleeding from a bullet graze on his side, was Alistair Thorne. The bandages clattered from my numb fingers. A scream lodged in my throat, silent and suffocating. He swayed on his feet, one hand braced against my kitchen table. His amber eyes found mine, burning with a feverish intensity. "Please," he rasped, the word raw. I had nowhere else to go. Reality fractured. Men did not turn into wolves. Wolves did not turn into men. Yet the evidence stood before me, shivering and proud and impossibly real. The king of the local whispers, bleeding on my kitchen floor. My grandmother's clock ticked on, marking the first seconds of a new, terrifying world. Time stopped. The world narrowed to the impossible man in my kitchen, the coppery scent of blood, and the deafening thunder of my own heart. I stood, frozen, the fireplace poker still clenched in my hand, a useless stick against this revelation. Alistair Thorne took a shuddering breath, and the movement seemed to cost him dearly. He winced, a fresh trickle of blood tracing a path down his hip. That simple, human sign of pain broke the spell that held me. My nursing instincts roared back to life, louder than the fear, louder than the screaming questions. A patient was bleeding in front of me. Nothing else mattered. "Sit," I commanded, my voice surprisingly firm, "before you collapse and crack your head open on my floor." I gestured to a kitchen chair with the poker, then immediately felt ridiculous, as if a fireplace implement could threaten a man who was also a wolf. A ghost of a smile touched his bloodless lips. He moved slowly, with a predator's grace even in his weakness, and lowered himself into the chair. I grabbed the clean dish towel from the oven handle and tossed it to him without looking, for dignity's sake. He caught it deftly. "Thank you." I busied myself retrieving the scattered bandages and antiseptic, buying seconds to steady my breathing. My hands, which had stitched his wounds at the hospital without a tremor, were now shaking. I willed them to be still. He is a patient. Just a patient. The lie was so thin I could have laughed or screamed. When I turned back, he had the towel arranged with a modicum of modesty. His gaze followed my every movement, those amber eyes missing nothing. I knelt beside the chair, my professional mask firmly in place. "The bullet grazed you," I said, my voice clinical. "Clean pass-through, lucky. Human or otherwise." I dabbed at the wound with antiseptic-soaked gauze. His skin was fever-hot, just as it had been in the hospital. His muscles jumped under my touch, a contained power held rigidly in check. "Why come here?" I asked, focusing on the wound, not his face. "You have an estate. Guards, I assume. Doctors who know what you are." "The estate is compromised," he said, his voice tight. "The attack didn't happen in the woods. It happened in my own courtyard. Someone close let them in." The raw betrayal in his tone was unmistakable. "I couldn't risk leading them to my pack's healers. They'd be waiting for that." "And you thought leading them to a human nurse and her 5-year-old daughter was a better option?" I couldn't keep the sharpness from my voice. His hand, large and warm, covered mine where I pressed gauze to his side. I froze. "I came to warn you, Amara, not to endanger you further." His use of my name, spoken with such grave certainty, sent a jolt through me. "They know I was treated by you. In their eyes, that makes you involved." I pulled my hand away, finishing the bandaging with quick, efficient motions. "In what? What is this?" He was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant, listening to sounds I couldn't hear. The wind had picked up outside, howling around the corners of the cottage with a new ferocity. "My father was killed 3 months ago," he finally said, the words hollow. "Poison, a coward's weapon." The pain there was older, deeper than the bullet wound. "I am the Alpha of the Northern Territories. My pack is the largest and oldest in this part of the world. With my father gone, there are those who see weakness, who smell opportunity." "The Southern pack," I whispered, remembering the nurse's gossip about rival logging companies and land disputes. It all seemed so mundane then. He nodded grimly. "They has been encroaching for years, but this, an assassination attempt on sovereign territory? This is a declaration of war. And now," he looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something like regret in his fierce eyes. "Now they know a human saw me wounded. A human healer tended the Alpha. In their ideology, that is a contamination, a stain on our kind that must be cleansed." The word cleansed hung in the air between us, cold and final. All the breath left my lungs. My gaze flew to the hallway that led to Layla's room. "No," I breathed. You have to leave right now. Get as far from us as possible." "It's too late for that," he said, and there was no cruelty in his voice, only a terrible, resigned certainty. "My scent is all over this house now. They will come, to finish me and to erase any trace of my weakness." Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. I stood up, backing away from him. "Then we'll leave. We'll run, right now." "They'll track you. You have no idea how well they can track." He rose as well, towering over me even in his wounded state. The dish towel did little to diminish the sheer primal power he radiated. "The only chance you have, the only chance your daughter has, is under my protection." A harsh, brittle laugh escaped me. "Your protection? You're one wounded man against a pack of whatever they are." "I am not alone." As if on his command, a howl split the night, not from one throat, but from a dozen. It was a sound that bypassed logic and spoke directly to the ancient, fearful creature in the base of my skull. It was answered almost immediately by another chorus, deeper, closer, coming from the tree line right behind our cottage. The air vibrated with the sound. It was a song of territory, of challenge, of impending violence. Alistair's head snapped toward the window, his body tensing. "They're here. Both." "Both?" "My pack has come to defend their alpha." He looked back at me, his eyes glowing in the low light. "The southern wolves have come to destroy what I value." Another sound cut through the howling, the splintering crack of wood from the front of the house. Then the shattering of glass. They weren't just surrounding us, they were breaking in. Layla's terrified scream tore through the cacophony. "Mama!" Everything else vanished. My fear, the impossible reality, the bleeding king in my kitchen, all of it dissolved into a single, white-hot purpose. My daughter. I was running before the echo of her cry faded, the fireplace poker forgotten. I burst into her room to find her standing in her crib, tiny hands gripping the rails, her face pale and tear-streaked. The window beside her crib was shattered. Cold night air poured in, carrying the smell of pine and wild animal. And on the floor, amidst the glittering shards, crouched a wolf. It was smaller than Alistair had been, with mangy gray-brown fur and eyes that shone with a sickly yellow light. It was gathering itself to leap. A roar, not human, not wolf, but something in between, shook the walls of the cottage. A black shadow filled the doorway behind me. Alistair moved with a speed that blurred, placing himself between the intruder and the crib. He didn't transform, he simply moved, a shape of pure, protective fury. The wolf lunged. Alistair met it mid-air. There was no elegant fight, only a brutal collision of bodies. Snarls, the sickening sound of teeth on flesh, the crash of them tumbling into Layla's little dresser, sending toys and books flying. I snatched Layla from her crib, clutching her shaking body to my chest, backing into the farthest corner. I pressed her face into my shoulder. "Don't look, baby, don't look." But I had to look. I had to watch as Alistair, wounded and out of his wolf form, fought a fully shifted assassin in the cramped space of my daughter's bedroom. He fought like a man possessed, using his hands, his strength, his sheer will. He took a vicious bite to his forearm, and I saw his teeth clench in agony, but he didn't make a sound. He used the wolf's momentum to slam its head into the wall with a sickening thud. The wolf went limp. Alistair stood over it, panting, blood streaming from his new wound, his eyes wild and blazing. For a second, I was more afraid of him than I had been of the intruder. Then his gaze found us. The ferocity bled away, replaced by a frantic concern. "Are you hurt, either of you?" I could only shake my head, my voice trapped somewhere beneath my pounding heart. Layla peeked out from my shoulder. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at Alistair, at the dead wolf, with huge, awe-filled eyes. More crashes and snarls erupted from the living room. The battle wasn't over, it was just beginning. "We cannot stay here," Alistair said, stripping a sheet from Layla's bed and wrapping it hastily around his bleeding arm. "They will keep coming." "Where can we go?" The desperation in my voice was plain. "There is a place, a safe hold, but we must move now." He stepped toward us, then stopped, seeing the terror that must have been plain on my face. He knelt, ignoring the blood and the chaos. His eyes sought Layla's. "Little one," he said, his voice softening into something surprisingly gentle. "My name is Alistair. I need you to be the bravest girl in the world for your mama. Can you do that? Can you hold her hand very tight and be very quiet?" Layla, my shy Layla who hid behind my legs when strangers spoke to her, looked at this bloodied, fierce man and gave a solemn, tiny nod. He looked back at me. "Do you trust me to get you out of this?" I looked at my daughter, at our shattered home, at the world that had turned inside out in the span of minutes. I had no good choices, only him. "Yes," I whispered. A profound relief washed over his face. "Then follow me and do not stop for anything." He led us not to the front or back doors, but to the small, creaky door of the old root cellar in the kitchen. I'd never used it, storing only forgotten cans and holiday decorations on its steps. He yanked the door open and descended into the blackness without hesitation. "There's a tunnel," his voice floated up, echoing. "From the Prohibition era. My family has known of it for generations. It will take us beyond the perimeter." I clutched Layla, took a last look at our broken cottage, the only home she'd ever really known, and stepped into the dark after the wounded Alpha behind, leaving the sound of wolves and war behind. The tunnel was a throat of cold, damp earth. The darkness was absolute, thick enough to taste. Alistair's hand found mine in the black, his grip firm and guiding. His skin was still so warm. "Stay close, the path is uneven." We moved in silence, the only sounds our ragged breathing and the scuff of our feet on packed dirt. Layla was a silent, trembling weight in my other arm. I had no idea how long we walked. Time lost all meaning in the dark. Finally, Alistair stopped. "Steps going up," he murmured. "The exit is hidden in the foundation of an old watchman's cabin. My beta, Kale, should be waiting." He pushed up against what sounded like heavy wood. A slab of night sky speckled with stars appeared above us. Cool, clean air washed over my face. He climbed out, then reached down for Layla, lifting her effortlessly, then for me. We emerged into a small, overgrown clearing. The cabin was a dark silhouette against the trees, and standing before it, arms crossed, was a man with silver-streaked black hair and a gaze as sharp as broken glass. He looked from Alistair to me and Layla, his expression unreadable. "Kale," Alistair said, his voice strained with exhaustion. "Status?" "The perimeter around the cottage is holding, my king," the man who Kale said, his voice gravelly. "But the southern wolves are probing, testing our lines. They lost their scout." He looked at me. "The one you killed. They will not take that lightly." "This is Amara Reed and her daughter Layla," Alistair said, placing a hand on my shoulder, a claiming, protective gesture. "They are under my personal protection, by blood and by vow." Kale's eyes widened a fraction. A vow clearly meant something immense to them. He bowed his head, first to Alistair, then, to my shock, to me. "Then they are under the protection of the entire northern pack." Another howl tore through the night, closer this time. It was answered by a chorus from the direction of my cottage. The battle was still raging, for our empty home. Alistair swayed, the blood loss finally catching up to him. Kale was at his side in an instant. "We need to move you to the stronghold, my king. You need to heal." Alistair shook his head, his eyes finding me again. "First, secure them. Swear it to me, Kale. Swear it on your bond to my father." Kale placed a fist over his heart, his face solemn. "I swear it. Their safety is my life." Only then did Alistair's shoulders slump in acceptance. He looked at me, his amber eyes dimmed with pain. "Go with Kale," he said. "He will take you to a place where not even the wind can find you. I will join you when I can." He was leaving us after all this? A new kind of fear, cold and lonely, gripped me. "Alistair." "This isn't a goodbye, Amara," he said, and his voice held the weight of a promise. "This is a strategic retreat. The war for our lives has just begun, and I intend for us to win it." He turned and melted into the trees, a shadow among shadows. Kale gestured toward the cabin. "Come, we have little time." As I followed him, Layla's small voice whispered in my ear, her breath warm against my cold cheek. "Mama, is the wolfman our friend now?" I held her tight. The inside of the watchman's cabin was a single room, smelling of old wood and dust. There were no lights. Kale moved through the darkness with an unsettling, silent grace, as if he could see perfectly well. For all I knew, he could. "Sit," he said, his voice a low command. "We move in 5 minutes. You will need your strength." I sank onto a rough-hewn bench, Layla curled in my lap. Her breathing was too quick, too shallow. I could feel the prelude to an asthma attack tightening her small chest. Panic, cold and slick, joined the fear already churning in my gut. Her inhaler, I'd left it on her nightstand in the shattered ruins of her room. "My daughter, she has asthma. Her medicine, it's back at the house." The words tumbled out, choked. Kale paused in his swift, efficient movements, checking a cabinet, retrieving a heavy pack. He didn't look at me, but his posture changed. "Describe it." "It's a small blue inhaler on a white nightstand." He gave a sharp, single nod. "Remain here. Do not open the door for any sound, any voice that is not mine or the Alpha's." He was at the door in 2 strides, a phantom in the gloom. "If we do not return in 10 minutes, take the pack. There is a map inside. Follow the red line due east. Do not stop." Then he was gone, melting into the night with the same terrifying silence as Alistair. The silence he left behind was worse. It was filled with the memory of snarls and breaking glass. Layla whimpered, burying her face deeper into my neck. "Mama, I can't breathe good." "I know, baby, I know." I rocked her, my own breath coming in shallow gasps to match hers. "The nice man is getting your medicine. He'll be back soon." The lie felt flimsy. He wasn't a nice man. He was a lethal extension of a world that wanted us dead, and he'd just run back into a war zone for a child's inhaler. The minutes stretched like tar. Each tick of an imaginary clock was a lifetime. I counted Layla's wheezing breaths, each one a dagger in my heart. "Come on, come on, come on." I watched the door, half expecting it to be smashed in by a yellow-eyed nightmare. It opened without a sound. Kale slipped back inside, as silent as he'd left. In his hand was Layla's small blue inhaler, looking absurdly mundane. He tossed it to me. "The house is contested, but the room was clear." My hands fumbled, but I got the cap off and pressed it to Layla's lips. "Deep breath, sweetie. Come on, for Mama." She took a shuddering puff, then another. Slowly, slowly, the terrible tightness in her chest began to ease, her breathing deepening into ragged but steady rhythm. A sob of pure relief caught in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered to Kale, the words utterly inadequate. He merely nodded, his sharp eyes assessing Layla. "Can she walk?" "I can carry her." "You will need your arms free. She must walk or we do not go." There was no cruelty in the statement, only a brutal practicality. I looked at Layla's pale, tired face. "Can you be a big, brave explorer for a little while, Layla? We're going on a secret walk in the woods." She nodded, her small jaw set with a determination that mirrored my own. "I can be brave." "Good girl." I set her down, keeping a firm grip on her hand. "Lead the way." Kale shouldered the pack and opened the door. "Stay directly behind me. Step where I step. Do not speak. The forest has ears tonight." We left the cabin and entered a world of deeper darkness. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the ancient pines of the Whispering Woods formed a canopy so dense it felt like we were moving underwater. Kale moved with an uncanny certainty, avoiding every dry twig, every patch of noisy leaves. I mimicked his footsteps as best I could, pulling Layla along, her little legs working double time to keep up. The woods were not silent. They were alive with sounds that now held new, terrifying meanings. The hoot of an owl made me jump. The rustle in the undergrowth to our left had my heart hammering against my ribs. Every shadow seemed to shift and coil. We walked for what felt like hours. My nerves were frayed wire. Layla stumbled often but never cried out, simply got back up with a quiet, dogged resilience that broke my heart. Finally, Kale held up a fist. We froze. Ahead, through the trees, I could see the outline of a massive rock formation, a sheer cliff face covered in vines and moss. He approached it, running his hands over the stone as if searching for a secret latch. With a low grunt, he pressed against a section of rock, and with a sound of grinding stone that seemed too loud, a section of the cliff swung inward. A doorway, hidden in the mountain itself. "Welcome to the stronghold," Kale murmured, ushering us inside. The door swung shut behind us, sealing with a solid thunk that echoed in a vast, dark space. Then lights flickered on, not electric lights, but globes of some softly glowing moss or fungus set into sconces along the walls. They revealed a cavern, but one that had been carved and shaped into something extraordinary. The ceiling soared high above, lost in shadows. The walls were smooth stone inscribed with intricate, flowing symbols that seemed to tell stories of wolves and moons and forests. A clear, cold stream trickled through the center of the space, and the air smelled of clean water, stone, and something else, something wild and earthy. But it was not empty. Figures emerged from side passages and alcoves, men and women all moving with that same predatory grace, all watching us with curious, assessing eyes. Their gazes were not unfriendly, but they were intense, weighing, measuring. I pulled Layla closer, instinctively putting myself between her and the crowd. A woman stepped forward. She was tall and striking, with dark hair braided tightly back and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore practical clothes but carried an air of quiet authority. Her gaze swept over me, then softened as it landed on Layla, who was peeking out from behind my legs. "Kale," the woman said, her voice melodic. "You've brought guests, the Alpha's humans." "Elena," Kale acknowledged with a slight dip of his head. "They are under his vow. The girl needed her medicine." Elena's eyebrows rose. "You retrieved it? During a skirmish?" There was a hint of surprise, maybe even respect in her tone. "The Alpha's vow is absolute," he stated as if that explained everything. He turned to me. "Amara Reed, this is Elena. She is the Alpha's sister and the head of our healers. She will see to your needs." Sister? I looked at her more closely. I could see it now. The same sharp cheekbones, the same proud set to the jaw, though her eyes lacked Alistair's burning amber. Hers were watchful, analytical. "My brother has told me much about you," the Alpha's sister said, her tone neutral. "The human with steady hands." "He's told you about me?" The thought was unsettling. What had he said? An Alpha does nothing without his pack's knowledge, especially when it involves a human in our affairs. She smiled then, a small, careful thing. "Do not fear us, Amara. If Alistair has claimed you, then you are pack adjacent. We protect our own. Come, you both look exhausted. Let me show you where you can rest." She led us away from the main cavern, down a side passage that opened into a series of smaller, cave-like rooms, each furnished simply but comfortably with beds, shelves, and rugs. It was like an underground lodge. She showed us to a room with 2 beds. "This will be yours. There are clothes in the trunk that should fit. The stream water is clean to drink and wash with. We will bring food." It was all so bizarrely normal, a bedtime routine in the belly of a mountain surrounded by werewolves. Once Elena left, I tended to Layla, using cold water from a basin to wash her face and hands. I found soft, simple tunics and trousers in the trunk and changed her out of her pajamas. She was asleep almost the moment her head touched the pillow, the adrenaline crash finally claiming her. I sat on the edge of my own bed, too wired to sleep. The events of the night played on a loop behind my eyes. The check, the wolf, the transformation, the fight, the flight, and now this hidden kingdom. A soft knock at the doorframe made me jump. Elena stood there, holding 2 steaming clay mugs. "I thought you could use this. It's an herbal blend, calming, and it will help with the shock." I took the mug she offered. The scent was of mint and something woodsy. "Thank you for all of this." She leaned against the wall, sipping her own tea, studying me. "You are handling this better than most would." "I don't feel like I'm handling it at all. I feel like I'm standing on a cliff edge in a hurricane." A faint smile. "An apt description, but you are still standing. That is what matters." She paused. "My brother, he is not impulsive. He does not give his vow lightly. To protect a human so absolutely, it has not been done in generations." "What does it mean, this vow?" "It means," she said slowly, setting her mug down, "that your life and your daughter's life are now inextricably tied to his. To harm you is to harm him. To challenge his protection of you is to challenge his authority as Alpha. It is a bond of blood and honor. It is, for all intents and purposes, permanent." Permanent. The word echoed in the stone room. "So we can never go back? To our lives?" "Do you have lives to go back to?" she asked gently but pointedly. "The Southern Pack knows of you. They will not stop. Your only path to safety is through us now, through him." The finality of it was a crushing weight. My independence, hard won over years of struggle, was gone, swallowed by a promise I hadn't even asked for. "Why?" I whispered, the question finally breaking free. "Why would he do that? For us? He doesn't even know us." Elena's stormy eyes held mine. "There are old tales among our kind, prophecies some call them, stories of an alpha who would bridge the gap between wolf and man, who would be marked by a human's healing touch." She gestured to my hands. "Your hands, Amara, they did not shake when you touched his wounds, even when you knew they were not natural. You showed him compassion when his own world was showing him only betrayal. That is a rare thing. To a leader surrounded by challenges, a moment of unguarded kindness can feel like a lifeline." It sounded like a fairy tale, a dangerous, binding fairy tale. "So I'm a symbol? A prop in some ancient story?" "You are a person he has chosen to protect," she corrected firmly. "The reasons are his own, but know this, my brother is a good alpha, a just one. He would not chain you to a fate you do not want. When the danger has passed, choices will remain. But for now, you must let us be your shield." She pushed off from the wall. "Rest. You are safe here. The entrance is guarded, the passages are known only to us. No southern wolf will set foot in this mountain." After she left, I drank the tea. It was warm and soothing. I lay down, listening to Layla's steady breathing and the distant whispery echo of the underground stream. Just as I was drifting into an uneasy sleep, a new sound reached me, faint at first, then growing. It was the sound of many voices raised in a low, harmonious chant coming from the main cavern. It was beautiful and eerie, a song without words that spoke of loss and remembrance. I slipped out of bed and crept to the entrance of our room. Peering down the passage, I could see into the main cavern. The pack was gathered in a circle around the central stream. In the center, on a bier of stone, lay 3 forms covered with dark cloths. The fallen, from the battle at my cottage. Kale stood at the head, his voice leading the chant. Elena was there, her head bowed. And then I saw him, emerging from a shadowy archway. Alistair. He was clean, dressed in dark, simple clothes, but he moved with a stiffness that betrayed his injuries. His face was a mask of grim sorrow. He walked to the bier and placed a hand on each of the shrouded forms, his head bowed. The chant rose to a soft peak, then faded into silence. He turned to face his pack, his amber eyes glowing in the moss light. Liam, a loyal heart, a fierce protector. He moved to the next. Sorcha, my father's trusted guard. She died defending the new life he swore to protect. His gaze flickered just for an instant toward my hiding place. Did he know I was watching? So his sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, troubled sea. I dreamed of amber eyes in the dark, and the sound of my own name whispered on the wind. I awoke to the soft glow of the moss lights and the realization that the distant, harmonic chant had been replaced by the quiet, purposeful sounds of a community waking. Layla was still deeply asleep, her small face peaceful. The events of the previous night seemed like a fever dream painted on the stone walls around us, but the soreness in my muscles from our desperate flight, the faint, earthy smell of the cavern, and the lingering echo of the pack's howl confirmed it was all terrifyingly real. A soft tap at the doorway. Elena entered, carrying a tray with simple food, bread, dried fruit, cheese, and a pot of tea. "I thought you might be awake. How is she?" Exhausted, but sleeping soundly. I nodded toward Layla, my voice hushed. "Thank you for this." She set the tray on a small table. "It is nothing. You are our guests." Her storm-gray eyes studied me. "You watched the remembrance last night." It wasn't an accusation, but a statement. I felt a flush creep up my neck. "I heard the chanting. I didn't mean to intrude." "You did not intrude. If my brother did not wish you to see, he would have posted a guard at your passage." She poured tea into 2 cups. "It is important you understand what is happening, what you are a part of now." I accepted the cup, the warmth seeping into my cold fingers. "He called their deaths a desecration because they died protecting us?" "They died upholding their Alpha's vow," Elena corrected, but gently. "There is no higher honor for a pack member. Their sacrifice binds us closer. It makes your safety a matter of pack pride, not just Alpha's command." She took a sip of her tea. "But it also raises the stakes. The Southern Alpha, Silas, will see their deaths as a provocation. He will retaliate." The bread turned to dust in my mouth. "How?" "That is what the War Council will determine today." She looked at me, her gaze piercing. "Alistair will want you there." "Me? Why? I'm not a warrior. I'm not even one of you." "You are the reason for the vow. You are the catalyst. Your perspective as an outsider, as the human at the center of this, may be valuable. And," she added, a hint of something softer in her expression, "it is a show of trust. He is bringing you into the inner circle. Do not refuse." It wasn't an offer, it was an expectation. The weight of this new reality settled on me further. My choices were being circumscribed by a world I didn't understand. After Elena left, I washed and dressed in the simple clothes from the trunk, soft, dark trousers and a tunic that fit surprisingly well. I braided my hair back, my hands moving through the familiar motion, seeking comfort in routine. Layla stirred as I finished. "Mama? Where are we?" Her voice was small, thick with sleep and confusion. I sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair. "We're in a safe place, Sweet Pea, a secret place in the mountain. Remember the nice man, Alistair? This is his home." "The wolf man," she said, memory solidifying in her eyes. She sat up, looking around the stone room with wide-eyed wonder, not fear. "It's like a cave in my storybook. Are there treasures?" Her resilience was a balm. "Maybe later we can explore. But first, I need to go to a meeting. Elena, the lady who brought the food, will stay with you. Is that okay?" She considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Is she a wolf lady too?" "Yes, sweetie, she is, and she's very kind. I hoped I was telling the truth." Elena returned shortly with a young woman named Maya, who had a bright, friendly smile and immediately won Layla over by producing a handful of smooth, painted river stones. "We can play a game with these," Maya said, and Layla was enchanted. "She will be safe," Elena assured me, seeing my hesitation in my eyes. "Now come, they are waiting." She led me back through the winding passages, deeper into the heart of the mountain. We entered a chamber larger than our room, but more intimate than the great cavern. A stone table, hewn from the living rock, dominated the space. Around it stood Alistair, Pale, and 3 others, a massive, silent man with arms like tree trunks, a sharp-faced woman with watchful eyes, and an older man with a silver beard and a scholarly air. All conversations ceased as I entered. 5 pairs of eyes, 2 amber and 3 of varying shades of intense, focused gray and blue, fixed on me. The weight of their collective gaze was physical. I felt exposed, human, fragile. Alistair was at the head of the table. He looked better than he had last night. The pallor of blood loss was gone, replaced by a healthy, vigorous color. But the shadows under his eyes spoke of a different kind of exhaustion, the weight of kingship. "Amara," he said, and his voice, that low rumble, was a touch warmer than it had been with the others. "Thank you for joining us. This is my war council." He gestured to each in turn. "Kale, my beta, you've met. Bryn, head of security." The sharp-faced woman gave a curt nod. "Tor, head of sentinels." The giant man rumbled something that might have been a greeting. "And Arlo, our historian and lorekeeper." The older man, Arlo, offered a small, kind smile. "A human in the war room. It has been centuries." "She is here because her safety is the crux of the conflict," Alistair stated, pulling out a chair for me beside him. I sat, feeling impossibly small at the stone table. "We need to understand what Silas's next move will be, and we need to plan ours." Bryn spoke first, her voice clipped and efficient. "Our scouts report the southern wolves have withdrawn to the granite cliffs, their traditional den. They're licking their wounds, but they're not broken. Silas lost face last night. He challenged your authority directly and failed. He will need to reassert his dominance, and soon." "He will try for the human again," Kale said flatly, his eyes like chips of flint as he looked at me. "It is the clearest way to undermine you, Alistair, to prove your vow is worthless, that you cannot protect what you claim." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "Agreed," Alistair said, his jaw tight, "which is why Amara and her daughter cannot remain here indefinitely." My head snapped up. "You're sending us away?" A strange mix of relief and hurt twisted inside me. "No," he said, meeting my gaze. "I am making you invisible. Arlo." The old lorekeeper cleared his throat. "There is an ancient place deep in the northern reaches of our territory. The humans once called it the Vale of Echoes. It is a place of quiet power. The geography creates a natural barrier to sense and sounds. To shifter senses, it is like a blank spot on a map. In the old days, it was used to protect pack young during times of great danger." "A safe house," I murmured. "More than that," Arlo said, his eyes twinkling with hidden knowledge. "It is a place of stillness. It would shield you completely while we deal with Silas." "Deal with him?" I asked, dreading the answer. "He has declared war," Bryn said, her tone leaving no room for sentiment. "He murdered 3 of ours on sovereign land. There is only one answer, a formal challenge, Alpha to Alpha, for dominion of the southern territory." My blood ran cold. Another fight. To the death? I looked at Alistair. He was already wounded. You can't. You're not healed. His amber eyes held mine, and in them I saw not the reckless warrior, but the calculating king. I will be, and it is the only way to end this without a protracted war that would claim dozens more lives. A single combat. Winner takes all. It is our oldest law. And if you lose? The words were out before I could stop them, hanging in the air like a condemnation. The silence around the table was absolute. Tor, the giant, actually growled, a low, dangerous sound. Alistair didn't look away. If I lose, Silas becomes alpha of both territories. His first act would be to purge any trace of human contamination. His wolves would be given the scent of you and your daughter, and they would hunt you to the ends of the earth. There would be no safe place. The room seemed to spin. Layla's face flashed in my mind. The stakes weren't just about territory or pride. They were a death sentence for my child. So you have to win, I whispered. Yes, the word was a vow in itself. The council began discussing logistics, scout patrols, strengthening the stronghold's defenses, the route to the Vale of Echoes. I listened, but the words blurred. My fate, Layla's fate, was being decided by people who were essentially strangers in a war over ideologies I barely grasped. After a time, Alistair dismissed the others. They filed out, each giving me one more appraising look. Soon it was just him and me in the stone chamber. "You're quiet," he observed, leaning back in his chair. The regal authority he'd worn in front of his council softened into something more personal, more tired. "I'm processing the fact that my daughter's life depends on you winning a fight against a monster." "Silas is not a monster," Alistair said, surprisingly. "He is a traditionalist. He believes our purity, our separation, is what keeps us strong. He sees my openness to the human world as a fatal weakness. In his mind, he is saving our kind. That doesn't make him less dangerous. No, it makes him more dangerous because he truly believes he is right." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I did not mean for this to fall on you, Amara, any of it." "The check," I said suddenly, the thought crystallizing. "The money, was that part of it? Paying off the human to keep quiet so your openness wouldn't be discovered?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "It was a precaution, a clumsy human world solution to a shifter problem. I thought if I ensured your silence, the incident would be contained. I was wrong. The betrayal came from within my own ranks. Someone told Silas about you, about the human nurse who saw the Alpha vulnerable. That was the true provocation. Someone close to him had betrayed him. The pain of that was still fresh in his eyes. I thought of the warmth of his hand over mine in the hospital, the tremor that had run through him. Not fear of me, but perhaps fear of this exact consequence. "Why did you come back to my house?" I asked, the question that had haunted me since the tunnel. "If you knew they were tracking you, why lead them to us?" He stood and walked to a natural fissure in the wall that served as a window, looking out at the hidden forest beyond the mountain. "When I realized the traitor had given your name, your address, I felt a responsibility I cannot explain. You showed me kindness when you had no reason to. You asked for nothing. In a night of betrayal, your steady hands were the only honesty I encountered." He turned to face me, his expression raw. "I thought I could get to you first. I thought I could warn you, get you to safety before they arrived. I underestimated their speed. My failure put you in the path of the assassin. That is a debt I can never repay." His honesty disarmed me. This wasn't a king issuing commands. This was a man burdened by guilt, trying to make amends in the only way his world allowed, with absolute, violent protection. "The Vale of Echoes," I said, changing the subject, my voice steadier. "When do we leave?" "Tonight, under cover of darkness. Kale and a small, trusted team will take you. You will remain there until I send for you." "And how will I know if—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "If you're alive." "You will know." He stepped closer, and the air in the room seemed to grow warmer. "The bond of a vow is not just words, Amara. It's a connection. If I fall, you will feel it, a breaking, and you must run. Maya will have instructions." The thought of feeling his death was horrific. I shook my head, refusing to accept it. "You can't ask me to just hide and wait for a feeling." "I am not asking," he said, the alpha back in his voice, though his eyes remained gentle. "I am telling you, as the man who swore to protect your life, that this is the only way to ensure it is safe. Let me fight this battle. Let me clean up the mess I brought to your door." He was right, and I hated it. I was a woman of action, of doing. Hiding felt like cowardice, but it was the smart, the motherly thing to do. For Layla. "Okay," I breathed, the word a surrender. He nodded, a look of profound relief washing over his features. "Thank you." He moved to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Amara, the steady hands are not your only strength. Your courage, your calm in the storm, is a different kind of power. Do not forget that while you are in the quiet of the Vale of Echoes." He left me then, alone in the stone war room. I sat there for a long time, his words echoing around me. I thought of the blood I'd cleaned, the wounds I'd stitched, the child I'd soothed. That was my domain, not battlefields or Alpha. The journey to the Vale began at moonrise. Layla was a warm, sleeping weight in my arms, wrapped in a soft woolen cloak Elena had provided. Kale, Tor the giant, and a wiry, silent scout named Fen made up our escort. We left the stronghold through a different passage than the one we'd entered, a narrow, winding tunnel that smelled of damp clay and ancient roots. No one spoke. The only sounds were the scuff of boots on stone, the drip of water somewhere in the dark, and the steady rhythm of Layla's breath against my neck. I focused on that sound, on the solid feel of her in my arms, using it as an anchor against the tide of fear and uncertainty. We emerged into a forest so dense and old it felt primordial. The trees were giants, their trunks thick as houses, their canopy blotting out the stars. Kale led us with an unerring sense of direction, moving swiftly but silently. Fen ghosted ahead, a shadow among shadows, scouting the path. Tor brought up the rear, his massive presence a bulwark against whatever might follow. We walked for hours. My arms ached, but I refused to let anyone else carry Layla. Holding her was my tether to sanity. Finally, as the first gray hint of pre-dawn light lightened the eastern sky, the forest began to change. The oppressive density of the pines gave way to slender, silver-barked trees with leaves that trembled at our passing. The air grew cooler, carrying a crisp, clean scent like ozone after a storm. And the sounds, they changed. The normal night chorus of the woods, the insects, the distant hoots, the rustling creatures, it all began to fade, swallowed by a profound, watchful silence. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a listening silence. "We are crossing the threshold," Kale murmured, his voice barely a breath. "The veil muffles all. Speak in whispers if you must speak at all." It was as if we had stepped into a bubble. The world outside seemed to recede, its sounds dampened, its presence muted. Even our own footsteps became soft, cushioned by a thick carpet of moss that glowed faintly with its own ethereal light. The silver trees grew in elegant spiraling patterns, their leaves catching the faint starlight that now pierced the thinning canopy. The veil itself opened before us as the path descended into a gentle bowl-shaped depression. In its center lay a perfectly still lake, its surface like black glass reflecting the dying stars and the rising moon. A small, sturdy cabin of gray stone and weathered timber stood at the water's edge, looking as if it had grown there naturally centuries ago. "The Echo Vale," Fen whispered, his voice full of reverence. "No shifter scent can hold here for long. No howl carries in or out. You will be ghosts." Kale approached the cabin, produced an old iron key, and unlocked the heavy door. Inside was a single room, simply furnished with a hearth, a table, 2 beds, and shelves stocked with supplies. It was clean, dry, and felt inexplicably safe. "There is a freshwater spring behind the cabin," Kale said, his voice still hushed in the pervasive quiet. "The garden is overgrown but still produces. Fish are plentiful in the lake. You will want for nothing essential." He placed a large pack on the table. "More supplies, medicine, clothing, and this." He handed me a slender carved bone whistle on a leather thong. "If you are in immediate dire peril, blow this. It will create a sound that can pierce the vale's silence. We will hear it, we will come. But use it only if death is at the door. It will also announce your location to any who might be lurking at the vale's edges." I took the cold, smooth whistle, looping the thong around my neck. It felt like both a lifeline and a target. Tor and Fen brought in firewood and checked the perimeter with silent efficiency. Kale stood before me, his flinty gaze unusually direct. "The Alpha's orders are clear. You stay until one of us comes for you. No one else. Not Elena, not any pack member you recognize. Only myself, Tor, or Fen. Do you understand?" "I understand." The rules were a cage, but a cage of safety. "The challenge is set for 3 nights hence, at the full moon, at the Standing Stones. If we do not come for you within 5 days of that, follow the northern star from the lake. It will lead you to a human hiking trail. From there, you are on your own. Forget us. Run. Hide." The finality in his tone left no room for hope. I simply nodded, my throat too tight for words. With final curt nods, the 3 shifters left. They moved back up the path and vanished into the silver trees without a backward glance. The profound silence of the vale settled around the cabin like a blanket. I laid Layla down on one of the beds, tucking the cloak around her. She sighed in her sleep, a sound that was oddly loud in the stillness. I stood in the open doorway, looking out at the glassy lake, the spiraling trees, the sky lightening to pearl gray. We were safe, and we were utterly, completely alone. The first day passed in a haze of exhaustion and disorientation. Layla woke full of questions, which I answered with half-truths wrapped in the premise of a special camping adventure. The veil worked its strange magic on her, too. The usual boundless energy of a 5-year-old was tempered by the quiet. She spoke in hushed tones, played by the lakeside, skipping stones that made no splash but sank with a soft plip. The silence was unnerving. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the absorption of it. I dropped a wooden spoon and the clatter was swallowed before it could echo. It made my own thoughts seem thunderously loud. I busied myself with routine, tidying the cabin, preparing food from the supplies, exploring the small wild garden. The work kept my hands busy, but did nothing to quiet my mind. It raced with images of Alistair standing before his pack, of the shrouded bodies in the cavern, of the cold calculation in Kale's eyes as he laid out the plan for my potential flight. That night, as Layla slept, I sat by the hearth, a single candle fighting back the deep velvety black of the vale's night. The bone whistle was cool against my skin. I thought of Alistair's words, "You will feel it, a breaking." What would that feel like? A sudden coldness? A pain in my chest? Or just a silent, empty knowing? I shook my head, disgusted with myself. I was thinking of his potential death as a signal for my escape, not as a tragedy for a man who had, in his own misguided way, tried to do right by us. a man who carried his grief and responsibility with a stark, lonely dignity. The second day, the silence began to breed not fear, but reflection. In the utter quiet, with no bills to pay, no shifts to work, no immediate danger screaming in my ears, I was left alone with myself, with the woman I had become. A survivor, yes, a protector, absolutely, but also someone who had built walls so high and so thick that even kindness had a hard time scaling them. Alistair had scaled them, not with force, but with vulnerability. He had shown me his wounds, both physical and of the soul, and in doing so he had trusted me with his weakness. In my world, that was a currency more valuable than any check. On the afternoon of the third day, the day of the full moon, the silence became unbearable. The waiting was a physical pressure on my skin. Layla felt it too, becoming clingy and quiet, her games losing their spark. To distract us both, I took her to the lakeside to skip stones, but the stones wouldn't skip. They just sank, as if the lake itself rejected frivolity. Frustrated, I threw one harder than I meant to. It flew far out, and instead of a splash, there was a soft, deep thump, as if it had hit a drumskin. And the lake answered. Not with a sound, but with a feeling, a gentle, resonant vibration that traveled up through the soles of my feet. In the perfectly still water, a series of concentric rings spread out from where the stone had vanished, moving in slow, perfect silence. Layla gasped, pointing. "It's singing, Mama! The water is singing without noise!" She was right. The vibration carried a sense of melody, of profound, ancient harmony. It was the veil's echo, not of sound, but of essence. As the rings reached the shore, a corresponding shimmer passed through the silver leaves of the trees, though no wind stirred. In that moment, I felt a sudden, fierce conviction. This place wasn't just hiding us, it was showing me something. A different kind of strength, not the explosive power of a wolf's bite, but the deep, resonant stability of the earth itself, the quiet that could outlast any storm. That night, the full moon rose over the vale, a perfect silver coin in a black velvet sky. It painted the lake in a path of liquid light. I put Layla to bed and went outside, drawn to the moonlight. I stood on the shore, the bone whistle cold against my chest, and I looked north, towards where I imagined the standing stones to be. The challenge would be happening now. 2 alphas, bathed in moonlight, fighting for the future of their people, for our future. I didn't feel a breaking. I felt a terrifying, hollow suspense. A prayer formed in my mind, wordless, desperate. Be strong, be clever, be alive. Hours passed. The moon climbed to its zenith and began its slow descent. The silence of the vale, which had felt oppressive, now felt like a held breath. I was part of that breath, waiting to be released. Just as the first hint of gray touched the eastern horizon, I felt it. Not a breaking, a pull. A sudden, sharp tug deep in my core, as if an invisible cord tied around my ribs had been yanked taut. It wasn't painful, it was urgent, insistent. It pointed like a compass needle, thrumming the low, steady frequency of need. It was Alistair. He was alive, and he was calling, not with a sound, but through the bond he had spoken of, the vow's connection. He was hurt, maybe badly, and he was seeking the very thing he had first come to me for. He was seeking a healer. The pull was unmistakable, a magnetic draw towards the northern edge of the veil. He wasn't in the veil, its magic wouldn't allow his shifter essence inside, but he was close to the border. He had come to the one place his enemies could not easily follow, to the one person his bond could lead him to. I stood frozen for only a second. The War Council's order screamed in my head, "Stay, wait, only leave if we come for you." But the pull was more than an order. It was a prayer written in my own blood. The man who had fought for us, who was bleeding again because of us, was out there, and he was asking for my steady hands. I looked back at the cabin, at the door behind which my daughter slept, safe and silent. Going out was a risk. It could be a trap. It could undo everything. But the man who had sworn a vow to protect my life was now trusting me with his life. I made my choice. Moving quickly, I wrote a note for Layla in case she woke, telling her mama was just outside checking something and to stay in bed. I grabbed the medical kit from the supplies, slung it over my shoulder, and followed the insistent throbbing pull in my chest, out of the cabin and into the pre-dawn gloom. I walked away from the safety of the silent vale, towards the feeling of warmth and wound and wildness, the bone whistle bouncing against my heart with every step. I was breaking the rules. I was risking everything. But some vows, it seemed, worked both ways. The pull was a physical thing. It drew me along the northern shore of the silent lake, through the grove of shimmering silver trees, and up a narrow, mossy game trail that climbed out of the bowl of the vale. With every step I took away from the cabin, this silent magic of the place released its grip. First, the muffled quality of my own footsteps returned, the crunch of leaves under my boots sounding startlingly loud. Then the distant call of a morning bird pierced the air, a sound so sharp it made me flinch. I was leaving the sanctuary. With each yard, the weight of my decision grew heavier. What if this was a mistake? What if it was a trick? What if Silas had won, and this was some cruel trap using the bond I didn't fully understand? But the pull in my chest wasn't cruel. It was desperate. It was a thrumming ache of need that bypassed logic and spoke directly to the healer in me. Someone was bleeding. Someone was in pain. The same someone whose blood I had already stanched twice. The trail ended at a sheer rock face veiled by thick curtains of ivy. The pole pointed straight through it. Heart hammering, I pushed the vines aside. Behind them was not solid rock, but the entrance to another, much smaller tunnel, a mere crack in the stone, barely wide enough to squeeze through. The air that wafted out was cold and carried the faint, coppery scent of blood. I took a deep breath, clicked on the small flashlight from the medical kit, and edged into the darkness. The passage was short and tight, the walls scraping against my shoulders. After about 20 feet of claustrophobic squeezing, it opened into a shallow, damp cave. The first rays of dawn speared through a crack in the ceiling, illuminating the scene in stark, dusty beams. Alistair lay crumpled against the far wall. My breath caught. He was in human form, barely conscious. His clothes were torn to ribbons, soaked with blood that looked black in the dim light. Fresh, livid claw marks scored across his chest, overlapping the older, barely healed wounds. One arm was bent at a sickening angle, but his eyes, half-lidded and clouded with pain, found mine as I entered. The amber was dim, but recognition flared in their depths. You felt it. You came. All my fear, all my second-guessing vanished in a wave of pure medical horror. I was at his side in an instant, my kit already open. Don't talk, just breathe. His skin was furnace hot, his pulse a frantic, thready flutter under my fingers. Shock, blood loss, multiple traumatic injuries. My mind cataloged the damage with cold, clinical speed, even as my hands trembled. This was far worse than the gunshot or the assassin's bites. The challenge? I asked, working quickly to cut away the tattered fabric, exposing the brutal damage beneath. 1, he gritted out, a fierce, prideful light briefly cutting through the pain. Silas is subdued. His pack yields. A violent cough shook him, bringing fresh blood to his lips. But his beta, Talon, betrayed his own alpha's surrender, ambushed me as I left the stones. A betrayal within a betrayal. The politics of it meant nothing. The viciousness of the act meant everything. This wasn't a wound of honorable combat. This was the coward's strike Cale had warned of. I need to set this arm, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. It's going to hurt. He gave a weak, almost imperceptible nod, his jaw clenched. Do it. I had set bones before in the ER, with proper equipment and colleagues to help. Here I had a flashlight, basic supplies, and a patient who was part supernatural predator. I took his good hand and placed it on a stable rock. Hold here, don't let go. I positioned myself, took a firm grip above and below the break, and pulled. The sound of grating bone was sickening. Alistair's body arched off the ground, a strangled roar tearing from his throat that was more wolf than man, echoing terribly in the small cave. But he didn't flinch away. He held the rock, his knuckles white, every muscle corded in agony. I aligned the bones as best I could, my fingers slick with his blood, and quickly fashioned a splint from a roll of bandage and 2 straight pieces of wood I found nearby. As I worked, I talked to him, a low, steady stream of nonsense, the same tone I used with terrified patients and with Layla during a thunderstorm. Almost done. You're doing so well. Just breathe through it. Almost there. When the splint was secure, I turned to the claw marks. They were deep, poisoned with mistrust and treachery. I cleaned them meticulously, the antiseptic stinging enough to make his muscles jump. He endured it in silence now, his breath coming in harsh, controlled pants, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as if seeing another world. "Why here?" I asked softly, applying pressure to the worst of the bleeding. "Why not go back to the stronghold? Elena couldn't risk the trail. Talon's faction might be waiting. The bond, it pulled me here, to you. Knew the veil would mask me." His eyes found mine again, the effort immense. "Knew you would know what to do." The trust in those words, spoken from the brink of collapse, was more staggering than any vow. He had literally followed his life's thread to my doorstep, trusting my skill over the safety of his own den. I finished bandaging his torso, using up most of my gauze. He was stabilizing, but he was far from safe. The fever was a concern. His body was fighting infection and working overtime to heal at an accelerated rate, a process that was itself dangerous. "You need rest, real rest, and fluids." I rummaged in my pack and found a water skin. I lifted his head gently, helping him drink. He swallowed obediently like a child, his eyes never leaving my face. When he finished, he sank back, exhaustion claiming him. "Layla?" he whispered. "Safe, asleep in the cabin. She doesn't know I'm gone." A profound relief softened his features. "Good. You shouldn't have come. It was an order. It was a call," I corrected, sitting back on my heels, wiping my bloody hands on a clean piece of cloth. A faint, pained smile touched his lips before his eyes drifted shut. His breathing deepened, slipping into an uneasy sleep. The immediate crisis was over. Now came the vigil. I spent the day in that damp cave as the sun climbed and fell outside the crack above. I monitored his fever, changed dressings, trickled water into his mouth when he roused. He slept fitfully, murmuring in a language I didn't know, his body trembling with the effort of regeneration. At times his form would shimmer at the edges, as if the wolf within was struggling to emerge to heal itself, but he lacked the strength for a full shift. In the quiet hours, with only the sound of his breathing and the distant drip of water, I studied him, not as a patient, but as a man. The fierce king was gone, stripped away by injury and exhaustion. What remained was the stark reality of him, the strong lines of his face relaxed in sleep, the scars that told a history of violence, and the surprising length of his dark lashes against his pale cheeks. This was the truth of Alistair Thorne, not the monster, not the symbol, but a being of immense power and profound vulnerability, carrying the weight of 2 worlds on his shoulders. As evening approached, his fever broke in a drenching sweat. I cleaned him up as best I could, my movements clinical, my mind anything but. When he finally woke fully, his eyes were clearer, the amber glow restored to a soft burn. Amara. His name on my lips was a sigh of gratitude. Welcome back. I offered him more water, supporting his head again. His skin was cooler now, though still warmer than any human. How long? A full day. It's almost night again. He tried to sit up, gritting his teeth against the pain. Layla? Is fine. I checked on her at noon. She was eating berries in the garden, talking to a squirrel. The veil is keeping her peaceful. I didn't add that my brief return to the cabin had been fraught with guilt and terror that he would worsen in my absence. He sank back, processing this. You have been here the whole time. Where else would I be? He looked at me, a deep, searching look that seemed to reach into the core of me. Most would have obeyed the order, stayed safe. You crossed a boundary to enter a cave with a wounded predator again. You're not a predator to me, I said, the truth of it solid in my chest. Not right now. You're my patient. And what am I when I am not your patient? The question hung in the damp air, charged and delicate. I busied myself repacking the medical kit. I don't know. A king? A werewolf? A man who sends very large checks? He chuckled, then winced, clutching his ribs. A man who is profoundly in your debt again. We can keep a tally, I said, but my smile felt wobbly. The intimacy of the cave, the shared ordeal, was weaving a connection far more complex than debt. The bond, I said, changing the subject back to safer ground. It's real. I felt it, like a string tied inside me, pulling me here. He nodded slowly. The vow creates a tether for protection, so the Alpha can always find those under his shield. I did not expect that you would feel it so strongly, that you would be able to follow it to me. He said it with a sense of wonder. It usually only works one way. What does that mean? It means the connection is reciprocal, deeper than I intended, or perhaps, he said, his gaze holding mine, exactly as deep as it was meant to be. The prophecy, the human mate, the words hung unspoken between us, thicker than the cave's shadows. You need more time to heal, I said, standing up, brushing dirt from my trousers. But you can't stay here, and I can't stay away from Layla much longer. I know. He took a deep, steadying breath. Help me up. I can make it to the cabin. The veil's magic will resist me. It will feel oppressive, but it will also hide my presence completely from any trackers. It was a risk, bringing him into Layla's sanctuary, but leaving him out here, weakened and exposed, was a greater one. With great effort, and with me bearing most of his weight, we got him to his feet. He leaned heavily on me, his good arm slung over my shoulders. We were a slow, stumbling procession out of the cave, through the ivy curtain and back down the path towards the silent lake. As we crossed the threshold into the veil, I felt him stiffen, a shudder wear through his powerful frame. It's like walking through deep water, he murmured, his voice strained. The silence is heavy, but he persevered. By the time the cabin came into view, lit by the soft glow of the moss lights I'd left on, he was pale and sweating again from the effort. Layla was sitting on the doorstep, her knees drawn up, watching for me. When she saw us, she stood, her eyes wide. "Mama, you found the wolf man." I helped Alistair to the second bed inside. He sank onto it with a groan of relief. Layla hovered in the doorway, curious but hesitant. Alistair, despite his pain, managed a smile for Layla. "Hello again, little warrior. I'm afraid I've had another accident." She took a tentative step inside. "Did the bad wolves get you?" "A bad wolf, yes, but he won't be causing any more trouble." She seemed to accept this with the solemnity of a 5-year-old. "Mama fixes accidents. She's the best fixer." "She is.
Alistair agreed, his eyes finding mine over Layla's head. The very best. That night we were an unlikely trio in the stone cabin. Layla fell asleep quickly, soothed by my return and the novel presence of a patient. I sat in a chair between the two beds, keeping watch. Alistair lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "I have upended your life," he said quietly into the dark. "I have brought violence to your door, forced you into hiding, and now, into being a caretaker for a broken king. You have every right to despise me." I looked at his profile in the gloom, at the bandages that wrapped his chest, at the splint on his arm. I thought of the pull in my heart that had led me to him without hesitation. "I don't despise you."
Peace, I was learning, was a fragile creature in this new life. It lasted 3 days. Alistair healed with a speed that defied medical textbooks. The deep claw marks, which would have laid a human up for months, knitted together into pink, tender scars. The broken arm, while still in its splint, ceased to pain him with every movement. The feverish weakness receded, replaced by a restless energy that the oppressive quiet of the veil seemed to magnify. He paced the small cabin like the wolf he was, a caged king. Layla, however, thrived. She had adopted Alistair as a fascinating, if occasionally grumpy, part of our adventure. She would bring him smooth stones from the lake as presents for the patient, and he would accept them with grave seriousness, placing them in a neat row on the windowsill. She taught him a clapping game, and I would watch, my heart doing a strange, slow somersault as the formidable Alpha of the Northern Territories patiently tried to match his large, scarred hands to her tiny, quick movements. He was different with her. The fierce intensity softened into a watchful, gentle protectiveness. He listened to her endless stories about the shimmer trees and the quiet fish with unwavering attention. In turn, she had absolutely no fear of him. To her, he was just Alistair, the wolfman who was friends with Mama. On the 4th morning, I was in the overgrown garden, gathering herbs that smelled like mint and something sharper, when the quality of the silence changed. It wasn't a sound, the veil absorbed those. It was a pressure, a sudden, dense weight in the air, like the moment before a thunderclap. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I straightened, my hands full of green leaves, and looked toward the lake. Nothing moved. The water was its usual perfect black mirror. The silver trees stood in their silent, spiraling rows. But the feeling persisted, a sense of being watched from just beyond the veil of perception. I dropped the herbs and hurried back inside. Alistair was on his feet instantly, his good hand braced against the table. He had felt it too. His head was cocked, his eyes narrowed, every line of his body taut with alertness. Something is at the boundary. The southern pack? Talon? No. His voice was a low growl. This energy is like a shout. This is a whisper, a careful, probing whisper. He moved to the door, peering out through a crack. The veil's magic is resisting it, muffling it, but something is trying to listen in. Layla, sensing the tension, came to my side and slipped her hand into mine. "Mama, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetie. Alistair just thought he heard a bird." The lie tasted sour. He turned from the door, his expression grim. "It's not an attack, it's a scouting. Something is searching for a weakness in the veil's defenses, for a way in. Can they get in? Not without knowing the exact path, and not without sacrificing their shifter senses. The silence would blind and deafen them. Unless they had a guide, someone who knows the old ways, someone like Arlo, the historian, the lore keeper. A cold dread seeped into my bones. You think someone from your own pack is helping them? I think Silas is defeated, but his ideology is not. Talon represents a faction that believes even more fiercely in purity. They would see my sheltering of humans here, in a sacred place, as the ultimate blasphemy. He looked at me, apology and resolve warring in his gaze. They are not just trying to kill us, Amara. They are trying to erase the very idea of us. The pressure in the air spiked, sharp and sudden, like a needle jab.
Alistair flinched, a hiss of pain escaping his lips as his still healing wounds protested. A low, sub-audible vibration trembled through the floorboards, the veil groaning under an external strain. Then, as suddenly as it came, it vanished. The oppressive weight lifted. The silence returned, but now it felt thin, strained, like a drumskin that had been tapped too hard. "They're gone," Alistair murmured, but he didn't relax. For now. They've tested the walls and found them solid. They'll be back with a different tool. The fragile piece was shattered. The cabin was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a potential trap. We were hidden, but we were also cornered. "We need to leave," I said, the decision clear and cold. Alistair shook his head. "Leaving the Vale is what they want. Out there, their senses work. They will have the area surrounded, waiting for us to break cover. So we're just supposed to sit here until they find a way in? No." He began pacing again, his mind working visibly. "We use the one advantage we have, the bond." He stopped in front of me. "The tether between us, it exists here, even muted by the veil. I can use it, not to call for help, that would lead them right to us, but to send a pulse, a signal of duress to Kale. He will know the meaning. He will come, not to the veil, but to a rendezvous point outside its influence. We make a run for it, not blindly, but to a planned extraction." It was a military operation. My life had become a military operation. And if they intercept the signal, or intercept Kale, "Then we fight," he said simply. There was no bravado in it. It was a stark statement of fact. But doing nothing is a slower defeat. This way, we choose the ground. I looked down at Layla, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. I couldn't condemn her to a siege in this silent tomb. I had to trust the wolfman and his bond. "Do it," I said. He nodded, closing his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. I felt nothing at first, then a faint, warm hum started deep in my chest, right where the invisible tether was anchored. It wasn't the desperate pull from before. It was a deliberate, controlled vibration, a coded message sent down a singular, private wire. It lasted only a few seconds, then faded. "It is done," he said, opening his eyes. They glowed faintly with expended effort. "Kale will feel it. He will understand. We move at moonrise. It gives him time to get into position, and us the cover of darkness." The day that followed was the longest of my life. We prepared in silence. I packed a small bag with essentials, medical supplies, water, food. Alistair fashioned a crude sling for his broken arm and tested his mobility, his movements still stiff but functional. He took Layla aside and spoke to her quietly, his deep voice a soft rumble. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her nod solemnly, her small face set in an expression of grave importance. He was preparing her, not with lies about camping trips, but with the simple, terrifying truth that we might have to be very quiet and very brave. And she accepted it from him in a way that both shattered and fortified me. As the last light bled from the sky, and the moon, a slim silver crescent, rose over the silent trees, we were ready. We stood by the cabin door, a strange, small army, a wounded king, a human nurse, and a 5-year-old clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Stay behind me," Alistair said, his voice low and steady. "Step where I step. If I tell you to run, you take Layla and you run north. Do not look back. The whistle will guide Kale to you." I touched the bone whistle at my throat, a cold, hard talisman. "We stay together." He held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. "Together." He opened the door. The Vale at night was a place of profound velvet blackness and those faint glowing moss lights. We moved away from the cabin, not toward the main path we'd come in on, but along a narrower, more overgrown trail that skirted the western edge of the lake. Alistair led, moving with a predator's caution despite his injuries.
I followed, one hand on his back to maintain contact in the near-total dark, the other gripping Layla's small, trusting hand. The silence was our enemy and our ally. It hid our movements, but it also magnified every rustle of our clothing, every hitched breath. The sense of being watched returned, a prickling on my skin. Were they out there, just beyond the magic, listening for the one mistake? We had nearly reached the northern edge of the vale, where the silver trees began to thin and the normal, noisy forest waited, when Alistair froze. He held up a clenched fist. I stopped, pulling Layla close. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Ahead, at the very threshold where the vale's magic met the wild woods, a figure stood. It was not a wolf. It was a man, tall and lean, silhouetted against the slightly lighter gloom of the forest beyond. He stood perfectly still, facing away from us, as if peering into the impenetrable quiet he could not enter. Talon. I knew it instinctively. The betrayer, the one who had clawed open Alistair's victory. Alistair's body went rigid with a hatred so pure I could feel it radiating from him. His good hand curled into a fist. We were downwind, our sense swallowed by the veil. He hadn't seen us. We could wait, let him leave, slip out after he was gone. But then a second figure emerged from the trees to join the first, shorter, stooped, holding a staff. The moonlight glinted off a long silver beard. Arlo. The betrayal was a physical blow. The kindly scholar, the keeper of their history, standing with the zealot who wanted to purge their world of humans. Arlo raised his staff and began to trace symbols in the air at the vale's boundary. The symbols glowed with a sickly green light. Where they hung in the air, the silence rippled, like a pond disturbed by a stone. A sliver of normal sound, the chirp of a cricket, the rustle of leaves, bled through the breach. He wasn't trying to enter, he was trying to unravel the magic from the outside, to make a hole for Talon to slip through. Alistair looked back at me, his eyes blazing in the dark. This changed everything. We couldn't wait, we couldn't slip out later. If the veil's protection failed, we were exposed completely. He pointed to the east, away from the two figures, towards a denser thicket of the silver trees. His message was clear. Run that way, now. But running meant noise, meant potential discovery. As if sensing the disturbance in the magical fabric, Talon turned. His gaze swept the boundary line, passing over our position, then snapping back. He couldn't see us, not clearly, but he sensed something, a shift in the shadows. His eyes, reflecting the ghastly green light of Arlo's symbols, were the color of tarnished brass. He took a step forward, directly towards the weakening point in the silence. Alistair pushed me gently but firmly towards the thicket. Go. I grabbed Layla, ready to run, but before I could move, Alistair did something that stopped my heart. He stepped forward, out of the deepest shadows, and placed himself squarely between us and the breach in the boundary. He didn't shift. He stood there, a man with a splinted arm, facing two enemies, one a traitorous scholar, the other a deadly assassin. He was a dam holding back a flood. Talon's face split into a vicious smile. The king in exile, hiding behind human magic. His voice was a slithering thing that somehow pierced the diluted silence. Come out, Alistair. Let's finish what was started at the stones. Alistair said nothing. He just stood, a silent, unmovable sentinel. Arlo lowered his staff, his face etched with a sorrow that looked genuine. My boy, this path you are on, it leads to our extinction. Step aside. Let the purge happen. It is for the good of the species. You are not my historian. You are a vandal, and you will not touch what is mine. The word mine echoed in the fractured silence, a claim that encompassed both the veil and the humans hiding within it.
Talon's form began to shimmer, the air around him crackling with the promise of the shift. He was going to force his way through the weakening boundary. Alistair looked back at me one last time. In his eyes, I didn't see fear. I saw a command. Run. Now. And then he turned to face the breach, his own body beginning to glow with that familiar golden light. He was going to shift. He was going to fight, wounded and outnumbered, to buy us seconds. I couldn't leave him. Not again. My hand found the whistle at my throat. I tore it from my neck, raised it to my lips, and blew with all my strength. The sound that came out was not a shrill alarm. It was a deep, resonating note, pure and clear as a bell, that cut through the veil's muffling magic like a knife. It didn't echo, it expanded, ringing out across the lake, through the trees, a clarion call of absolute, undeniable distress. Talon and Arlo flinched, the unnatural sound disrupting Arlo's spellwork. The green symbols flickered and died. And from the dark woods to the north, a chorus of answering howls erupted. Not the mournful song of before, but the furious, rallying cry of warriors answering their king's call. Kale had heard, and he was close. The gamble was made, the silence was broken, the hiding was over. Now the race began.
The pure, piercing note of the whistle shattered the strained quiet like glass. For one heartbeat, there was absolute stillness, Talon and Arlo frozen in surprise. Alistair caught mid-shift in a corona of golden light, the very air seeming to crackle with the sudden release of sound. Then chaos erupted. From the dark forest beyond the boundary, the answering howls were not just a reply, they were a war cry. They were close, far closer than I dared hope. Kale had been waiting, poised just outside the veil's influence, and my signal was the spark to the tinder. Talon snarled, his human features contorting with rage. The shift overtook him in a violent, rippling wave, and where the man had stood now crouched a massive, brindled wolf with eyes like burning coals. He lunged, not at Alistair, who was still shimmering in transformation, but at the weakened point in the boundary, aiming to plunge through and get to us. Arlo stumbled back, his face a mask of horrified realization. He had not counted on this. He had imagined a quiet, magical unraveling, not a battlefield. "Run, Amara, north!" the command roared from Alistair, but his voice was changing, deepening, layering with a guttural growl as the shift completed. The magnificent black wolf stood where the king had been, his splinted arm now a foreleg held awkwardly against his chest, but his teeth were bared in a lethal snarl. He met Talon's lunge at the breach head-on. The collision of the two giant wolves was a thunderclap of muscle, bone, and fury. It happened right at the threshold, a maelstrom of snapping jaws and flying fur, half in the silent vale, half in the noisy woods. The magical boundary warped and groaned around them. I didn't wait. I scooped Layla into my arms, ignoring the protest in my muscles, and ran. Not the careful, silent steps of before, but a flat-out, desperate sprint toward the northern tree line, away from the fight. Branches whipped at my face, the glowing moss lights blurring into streaks. Layla buried her face in my neck, her small body trembling, but she made no sound. Behind us, the sounds of the fight were muffled and distorted, as if heard through water. Snarls were cut short, growls were swallowed. The veil was fighting to reassert its silence, even as its fabric was torn. I risked one glance back. The two wolves were a tangled, savage knot. Alistair, favoring his injured leg, fought with a ferocious, calculated precision, using his weight to keep Talon pinned at the breach. He wasn't trying to kill him, he was trying to keep him out, to block the hole. Then, other shapes exploded from the woods, wolves of all colors, gray, brown, tawny, pouring into the clearing, Kale's team. But they couldn't enter the veil either. They skidded to a halt at the edge, a line of bristling, frustrated power, unable to cross the magical line to aid their king. Arlo saw them and turned to flee into the woods, his betrayal complete. Kale, in human form, at the head of his warriors, didn't give chase. His eyes were locked on the duel at the boundary. He barked an order, and the wolves fanned out, forming a semicircle, sealing off any escape for Talon, if Alistair could drive him back out. My lungs burned. The northern edge was just ahead. I burst out of the silver trees and into the normal, blessedly noisy forest. The sudden cacophony of night sounds was overwhelming. I staggered, leaning against a rough-barked pine, gasping for air. A shadow detached itself from the trees to my left. I flinched, clutching Layla tighter, but it was Fen, the wiry scout. His face was grim. "This way, quickly." He led us at a brisk jog through a narrow ravine away from the sounds of battle. After a few hundred yards, we came to a small, hidden hollow where Tor stood guard, his massive arms crossed. A sense of temporary safety washed over me, so potent my knees nearly buckled. "The Alpha?" Tor's voice was a low rumble. "Holding Talon at the boundary," I panted, setting Layla down, her eyes huge. Fen nodded. "The Alpha has the perimeter. The traitor cannot escape." He looked at me, a flicker of respect in his keen eyes. "The whistle was a bold move. It cut through everything. He knew it was you." Before I could respond, a new sound cut through the night. Not a howl, but a pained, guttural yelp that was abruptly silenced. It came from the direction of the Vale. Alistair! My blood turned to ice. Without thinking, I took a step back toward the ravine. Fen moved to block my path. "You cannot. The fight is not over." "That was his voice," I hissed.
"And if he has fallen, walking back is walking into a trap," Fen said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Our orders are clear. Protect you and the child, at all costs." The minutes that followed were an agony. The forest around us had gone quiet again, the normal creatures frightened into silence by the surge of predator energy. We stood in the hollow, listening to the distant, muffled chaos. Layla began to cry softly, the adrenaline crash and fear finally overwhelming her. I knelt and held her, rocking her, whispering empty comforts, my own heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Then, footsteps, quick, purposeful. Fen and Tor tensed, moving to shield us. Kale emerged from the trees. His clothes were torn and a fresh cut bled above his eyebrow, but his posture was one of grim victory. In his hand, he dragged an unconscious naked man by the arm, Talon, back in human form, his body a mess of bruises and bites. Behind Kale, two other warriors supported a stumbling figure between them. Alistair. He was human again, and he was on his feet, but just barely. He was covered in blood, both fresh and dried. The bandages I'd applied were shredded, the claw wounds reopened. His splinted arm hung useless. But his head was up, and his amber eyes, though clouded with pain, scanned the hollow until they found me. The relief that slammed into me was so profound, it stole my breath. They lowered him to sit against a tree trunk. I was at his side in an instant, my medical kit already open. The damage was horrific, but it was all surface. Tears and bites and brutal, shallow gashes. Nothing immediately life-threatening. He had fought like a demon, taking a punishment to protect the breach. "You're a mess," I whispered, my hands already busy assessing, cleaning. He caught my wrist with his good hand. His grip was weak but urgent. His eyes searched my face. "Layla? She's fine. We're fine. Thanks to you." My voice broke. He released my wrist, his head falling back against the tree with a thump, a shudder of exhaustion racking his frame. "The bond. The whistle. You called them. You saved us." "You held the lime," I countered, dabbing at a deep gash on his cheekbone. Kale approached, dropping Talon's limp form unceremoniously to the ground. "The traitor lives. For now. The pack will decide his fate." He looked at Alistair, his muscle jumping in his jaw. "See that you do. The corruption goes deeper than I feared. This was not just the Southern pack. This was a cancer within our own." He looked at Talon with something colder than hatred. Take him to the stronghold, in the deepest cell. Let him contemplate his allegiance there. As Kale's warriors hauled Talon away, the rest of the pack began to gather in the hollow, shifting back to human form, tending to minor wounds. The mood was somber but resolved. They had answered their king's call and prevailed. Elena arrived minutes later, her healer's kit far more extensive than mine. She took over Alistair's care with efficient, gentle hands, giving me a grateful, knowing look. "You kept him alive long enough for us to get here," she murmured as she worked. I stepped back, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes on me. The pack looked at me differently now, not just as the human their alpha protected, but the human who had sounded the rallying cry, the human who had stood with him in the silence. Their gazes held a new weight, a dawning acceptance. Layla, emboldened by the calmer atmosphere, crept forward and knelt beside Alistair. She didn't say anything, she just carefully placed her now clean stuffed rabbit in his lap. He looked down at the small, worn toy, then at her serious little face. A smile, weary and genuine, touched his bloodied lips. "Thank you, little warrior. I will guard him with my life." She nodded, satisfied, and came back to lean against me. As Elena finished, Alistair struggled to stand. Kale moved to help him, but he waved him off, using the tree for support. He faced his pack, his body battered, but his voice carried the full weight of his authority. Tonight, we were tested from without and within. We faced betrayal from a keeper of our history and treachery from a warrior without honor. His gaze swept them, and every wolf held his eyes. And yet, we stand, because our bonds are stronger than their lies, because our vow to protect the innocent, human or wolf, is not a weakness, but our greatest strength. His eyes found me, and the intensity in them was a physical touch. The shadow that sought to divide us has been dragged into the light. The path ahead will not be easy, but we walk it together, as a pack, as a family. A low, approving murmur ran through the shifters. It wasn't a triumphant howl, but something deeper, a rumble of unity. Alistair turned to me, his expression softening. "The veil is compromised. You cannot return there. You will come with us, to the heart of the stronghold. No more hiding in the shadows. You will be under the mountain's protection, where every stone and every soul will guard you." It wasn't a request, it was a declaration, and for the first time, the idea of being surrounded by his world didn't fill me with terror. It filled me with a weary, hard-won sense of belonging. I looked at Layla, at the pack who had fought for us, at the wounded, stubborn king who had bled for us, and I nodded. "We'll come." The journey back to the mountain stronghold was a solemn procession. Alistair, supported by Kale and Tor, led the way. I walked beside Elena, Layla asleep in my arms once more. The pack moved around us, a living shield through the dark woods. We were not returning as fugitives, but as something else, something new. As the hidden door in the mountain swung open before us, spilling warm light and the scent of earth and community into the cold night, Alistair paused on the threshold. He looked back at me, his face etched with pain and purpose. "The war is not over," he said quietly, for my ears alone, "but the battle for your place in my world is won. Welcome home, Amara." I crossed the threshold, carrying my daughter into the depths of the mountain, into the heart of the pack, and knew with a certainty that resonated deeper than any prophecy. He was right. This was no longer just his world. It was becoming ours. The word felt foreign as I crossed the threshold into the mountain stronghold. This wasn't home. Home was a sunlit cottage with a leaky roof and a child's drawings on the fridge. This was a kingdom carved from stone, lit by glowing moss and governed by ancient laws I was only beginning to fathom. Yet, as the heavy door sealed behind us, a palpable shift occurred. The wary, assessing glances from the pack members we passed were gone, replaced by nods of acknowledgement, even flashes of respect. The story of the veil, of the whistle that pierced the silence, had spread. I was no longer just the Alpha's problematic human. I was the human who had stood at the boundary, the human who had called the pack to war. Alistair was taken immediately to the healer's chambers, a series of warm, steam-filled caverns with natural hot springs. Elena ordered me to come, not as a guest, but as an assistant. "You know his wounds," she said simply. "Your hands are familiar to him. It will help." So I found myself in a new role, not just a mother in hiding, but a nurse in a supernatural infirmary. I worked beside Elena, cleaning the reopened claw marks, applying poultices made from herbs I didn't recognize that smelled of pine and dark earth. Alistair endured it all in silence, his eyes closed, but his hand, whenever I was near, would seek mine, his fingers curling around my wrist with a gentle, anchoring pressure. Layla was with Maya, the young scout, who had appointed herself as a devoted guardian. I could hear their laughter echoing from a nearby chamber, Maya showing her how to make shadow puppets against the cavern walls with her wolf-like hands. Later, bathed, bandaged, and wearing clean clothes, Alistair summoned his council. This time I was not an outsider invited to observe. I was given a seat at the stone table as a matter of course. My chair was beside his. Kale, Bryn, Tor, and a somber-faced replacement for Arlo, a younger historian named Nessa with intelligent eyes, were already there. Talon, they reported, was secured in the mountain's deepest cell, a place designed to hold their own kind, where the stone dampened the shift. Arlo was still at large, but trackers were on his scent. "The southern pack is in disarray," Kale stated, placing a rough map on the table. "With Silas defeated and Talon captured, their chain of command has shattered. Several of their elders have sent tentative messages, seeking accommodation." "They fear absorption," Bryn said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "They should," Alistair replied, his voice still weak but clear. "But we will not be conquerors. We will offer terms, swear allegiance to the Northern Pact, adopt our laws regarding human interaction, and their territory remains theirs to govern, under our oversight." He tapped the map. "The age of isolated, warring packs ends now. It is a vulnerability our enemies exploited. Unity is our strength." It was a bold vision, a kingdom reshaping itself. "And the human presence?" Nessa, the new historian, asked quietly, her gaze flicking to me. "The incident with Arlo shows the depth of resistance to your policies, my king. There will be others who share his fear." All eyes turned to me. This was the heart of it. I was the policy. Alistair leaned forward, wincing slightly. "The human presence is not a policy. It is a fact. Amara and Layla are under my protection. They are pack adjacent. That is not up for debate." He said it with finality, but then his tone softened, becoming inclusive. "But Nessa is right. Fear must be addressed, not with force, but with understanding." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "Amara, you have seen our world at its most violent and its most vulnerable. You are a bridge. Will you help me build it?" The question hung in the air. They were asking me to be more than a protected guest. They were asking me to be an ambassador, a translator between species. My mind reeled. I was a nurse from Pine Ridge, not a diplomat. But I looked at Alistair, at the fading bruises on his face, at the fierce hope in his weary eyes. I thought of Layla laughing with Maya. I thought of the 3 shrouded bodies from the first night, wolves who died because of a vow to protect us.
I had been pulled into this world by chance, but I was staying by choice. And if I was staying, I couldn't just hide. I had to help make it safe. "I'll help," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "But I need to understand, truly understand, not just the politics, but you, your people, your ways." A look of profound relief crossed Alistair's face. Nessa smiled, a genuine, welcoming expression. "Then we shall teach you," she said.
starting with our history. It is, after all, the foundation of both our fears and our hopes. The days that followed were a strange new rhythm. Mornings were for Layla and her lessons with Maya, which were mostly play but also, I suspected, subtle teachings about pack hierarchy and territory, games of chase that mimicked patrols, sharing treats that reinforced community. My daughter was being gently, lovingly integrated. My afternoons were with Nessa in the archives, a vast cavern filled with shelves of scrolls, carved stone tablets, and even some modern books. She started not with wars or kings, but with the core of shifter belief, the connection to the moon, the forest, the pack as a single breathing entity. She spoke of the soul thread, the invisible web that connected all members of a pack, which was what made the Alpha's bond vow so powerful. It was weaving a new thread into the ancient web. Arlo feared that thread, Nessa explained one day, her fingers tracing a carving of intertwined wolves and humans on a stone slab. He believed introducing a human thread would weaken the entire web, dilute our essence. He saw purity as strength, but the web is strongest when it is diverse, when it has many different kinds of strength. It was a beautiful, complex philosophy. It made the betrayal sadder and more understandable. Evenings, if Alistair was strong enough, we would walk the interior gardens, a breathtaking cavern where bioluminescent fungi formed constellations on the ceiling, and an underground river provided a soothing murmur. We talked of small things at first, Layla's latest adventure, a new herb Elena was using in her poultices. The terrifying intensity of our first meetings had mellowed into a cautious, growing familiarity. One such evening, about a week after our return, he stopped by a quiet pool. "You have not asked about your old life, your cottage, your job." I watched the dark water. "I've thought about it, but it feels like a story about someone else. That life, it was built on sand, always one crisis away from collapse. This," I gestured to the stone around us, "this is built on bedrock. It's terrifying and strange, and sometimes I wake up convinced I've gone mad, but it's solid." "It is a cage to some," he said softly. "The mountain, the rules." "It's a sanctuary," I corrected, "and sanctuary requires walls." I looked at him. What will happen when it's truly safe, when the southern pack is settled and the traitors are dealt with? Will these walls become a cage for you, for someone who wants to build bridges? He was silent for a long moment. "I do not know," he admitted, a startling honesty from a king. "I have always been bound to this mountain, to this territory. It is my blood and my breath. But you?" He turned to face me fully. "You make me think of what lies beyond the territory, not to conquer, but to connect. You are changing the shape of my kingdom, Amara, from the inside out." The air between us hummed with the unspoken things, the prophecy, the bond that had pulled me through the dark, the way his hand still sought mine when the pain was bad. "I'm not trying to change anything," I whispered. "I'm just trying to keep my daughter safe." He knew, and that is the most revolutionary act of all in a world obsessed with power. He didn't try to kiss me. He didn't make a grand declaration. He simply stood there, sharing the quiet with me, his presence a steady, warm constant in the cool underground air. It was enough, more than enough. The peace was shattered 2 days later. I was in the archives with Nessa when a sentinel burst in, his face etched with panic. "My lady, Amara, you must come to the great cavern, now." A cold fist closed around my heart. "Layla." I was running before he could say another word, Nessa on my heels. The great cavern was in an uproar. Pack members were gathered in a tense circle.
In the center, held gently but firmly by Kale, was Layla. She was crying, not in fear, but in frustration and confusion. And in her small, outstretched hand, she held something that made the entire pack stare in shock. A tiny, shimmering wolf pup, no bigger than a kitten, made of what looked like condensed moonlight and shadow. It flickered in her palm, emitting a soft, distressed whimper. She was playing near the hearthstone, Maya was explaining quickly to Alistair, who had just arrived, his expression thunderous. The hearthstone was a monolith of obsidian in the very center of the mountain, revered as the source of the pack's spiritual connection. No one touched it, it was just there. Until my 5-year-old daughter hummed to it. It followed her, Layla sobbed, looking at me with tear-filled eyes. I didn't mean to, Mama. It just popped out and it's scared. Alistair approached slowly, his anger melting into stunned wonder. He knelt before Layla, his gaze locked on the flickering pup in her hand. The entire cavern held its breath. By the first moon, Nessa breathed from beside me, her voice filled with awe. A spirit pup. It hasn't been summoned since the founding of the pack. What does it mean? I asked, my voice trembling. Alistair looked from the spirit pup to Layla's face, then to mine. His amber eyes were wide with a revelation that was both wondrous and terrifying. It means, he said, his voice resonating through the silent cavern, that the mountain's heart has chosen. It doesn't just accept your presence here, Amara. He reached out a finger and the tiny pup of light nudged against it with a sound like a chime. It has welcomed your daughter as its own.
The silence in the great cavern was absolute, heavier than the Vale's quiet had ever been. Dozens of shifters stared, their expressions a kaleidoscope of shock, reverence, and dawning fear. The tiny, shimmering wolf pup of light nestled in Layla's palm seemed to pulse in time with the faint, glowing moss lights, its whimpers the sound of wind chimes in a distant dream. Layla looked from the creature to Alistair's awestruck face, her own tears slowing. "He's lonely," she whispered, as if sharing a secret. "The big black rock was lonely." Nessa stepped forward, her scholar's curiosity overcoming her awe. She moved with slow, deliberate respect. "The heartstone is not just a rock, little one. It is the anchor of our pack's soul thread. It holds the essence of every wolf who has ever sworn to this mountain." Her eyes were wide. "A spirit pup. It is a manifestation of that essence, a fragment of the mountain's soul. It has not taken form since the first Alpha bonded with this place." "Why her?" Bryn's voice cut through the wonder, sharp with a guard's practicality. "Why a human child?" All eyes turned to me. I could feel the old suspicion held at bay by recent events bubbling back to the surface. My daughter was not just living among them now, she was interacting with their most sacred object. To some, it would look like a desecration. To others, like Arlo, it would be their worst nightmare made flesh. Alistair rose to his feet, his movement causing the spirit pup to flinch and burrow deeper into Layla's hand. He faced his pack, his posture regal, his voice calm but carrying immense weight. "The why does not matter as much as the what," he declared. "The heartstone has acted. It has chosen to make itself known to Layla. This is not an intrusion. It is an invitation." He looked down at my daughter, his expression softening. "Can you put it back, little warrior? Can you show it the way home?" Layla nodded, her small face set with concentration. She turned and walked toward the center of the cavern, the pack parting before her like a sea. We all followed, a silent procession. There, rising from the stone floor, was the heartstone, a spire of polished obsidian that seemed to drink the light around it, reflecting nothing. Holding her cupped hands out, Layla approached the stone. She stood on her tiptoes and gently placed the shimmering pup against the black surface.
Instead of fading, the pup dissolved into 1,000 motes of light that swirled around the stone, once, twice, and then streamed back into it, vanishing without a trace. A collective exhale shuddered through the cavern. The tension eased, but the profound strangeness of the moment lingered. "The mountain has spoken," Alistair said into the quiet. "Its heart has welcomed this child. To reject her now would be to reject the very spirit of our home." He turned a slow circle, his gaze meeting the eyes of his people one by one. "The old arguments are over. The debate is closed. We are not just protecting humans. We are integrating a new thread into our web, a thread the web itself has reached out and drawn in." His words were a decree, the final word of the Alpha backed by the mystical authority of the mountain. I saw resistance fade from some faces, replaced with a reluctant acceptance. In others, like Nessa's, I saw excitement. A new chapter in their history was being written, and they were witnessing it. But as the pack slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves, Kale approached, his expression grim. "This will not sit well with everyone," he said lowly to Alistair. "Aloe is still out there. Others who think like him will see this as sacrilege, proof that the human influence is corrupting our most sacred core. It will fuel their fire." "Then let them burn them," Alistair replied, his voice cold. "The line is drawn. Here, at the Heartstone. We stand on this side. They can join us, or they can be consumed by their own fear."
Later, in the privacy of Alistair's chambers, a spacious cavern adjoining the war room, the magnitude of it all crashed over me. I sat on a stone bench, my hands shaking. Layla was with Elena, being fussed over and checked for any ill effects. "She summoned a ghost wolf from a rock?" I said, my voice hollow. "What does that even mean, Alistair?" He sat beside me, not touching me, but his presence a solid comfort. "It means the mountain recognizes a pure heart, a spirit unburdened by prejudice or agenda. The Heartstone responds to harmony. Her simple, innocent song resonated with it." He paused. "It also means her connection to this place, to our world, is now irrevocable. The mountain has claimed her as its own. She will always be tied to it." A new kind of fear, deep and primal, lanced through me. "You're saying she can never leave?" "I'm saying she will never want to leave, not truly. This mountain will be a part of her, as it is a part of me, but never leaving is not a prison, Amara. It is a belonging." He finally turned to look at me, his amber eyes earnest. "The same belonging I am offering you, not as a subject or a protected ward, but as a partner, to help me lead our people into this new era." My breath caught. A partner? The word was so much more than a nurse, an ambassador, a friend. "The human mate of prophecy," he said, not as a portentous declaration, but as a simple, profound fact. "Not because of an old story, but because of what I see. Your strength steadies me. Your compassion guides me. You see the individual where others see only species. I need that at my side." He took my hand, his touch warm and sure. "I want that at my side." Tears pricked my eyes. It was too fast, too strange, too everything. And yet it felt like the most natural next step on the path fate had shoved me onto. I thought of the pull in my chest that had led him to the cave. I thought of the whistle's call I hadn't hesitated to make. Our stories were already entwined. "I'm scared," I admitted. "So am I," he said, a startling confession. "I am scared of failing my people, of not being strong enough or wise enough to bridge this gap. But I am less scared with you here." That was the truth that undid me. Not grand promises of power or eternity, but a confession of shared fear and shared strength. I leaned my head against his shoulder, the stone wall cool at my back. "We'll figure it out, one day at a time."
He rested his cheek against my hair, and we sat in silence, not the listening silence of the veil, but the comfortable quiet of two people who no longer needed words to understand. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The formal terms were offered to the Southern Pack elders. After tense negotiations, they accepted, swearing allegiance to the Northern Pact. The world beyond our mountain began to reshape itself. Layla's connection to the Heartstone became an accepted, if wondrous, fact. She would often sit near it, humming or drawing, and sometimes, if the mood struck the mountain, a wisp of light would curl around her fingers like an affectionate pet. The pack, especially the younger members, began to see her as a lucky charm, a symbol of a hopeful future. My own role evolved. I began holding informal sessions with pack members who were curious about the human world, and with the help of Nessa, I learned more about shifter healing, blending their herbal lore with my modern medical knowledge. We started a true clinic within the stronghold. One evening, Alistair and I stood at the main entrance, looking out at the forest bathed in twilight. His injuries were fully healed, the last scars fading to silver lines. He was strong again, a king in full power. "Kale's trackers found Arlo," he said quietly. "He had holed up in a forgotten shrine deep in the Whispering Woods. He offered no resistance. He just looked tired." "What will happen to him?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "Exile," Alistair said, the word heavy with finality. "He will be taken far from here, to a territory with no pack, and left to live out his days alone. It is a crueler punishment for our kind than death." He sighed. "He was my teacher once. It is a loss." I threaded my fingers through his, offering silent support. We were learning that leadership meant carrying the weight of such losses. "There's something I want to show you," he said after a moment. "Tomorrow, at dawn." He wouldn't say more. The next morning, he led me, Layla, and a small guard, including Kale and Elena, out of the mountain, not on a path of escape, but on a purposeful walk. We went to a place I had never seen, a high meadow at the edge of the Whispering Woods, overlooking the valley where my old cottage lay. The rising sun painted the world in gold and pink. In the center of the meadow stood a new structure. It was not a castle or a fortress. It was a long, low building with timber and stone, with large windows and a wide porch. It looked like a lodge or a very large, elegant home. Smoke curled from a chimney. "What is this?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "A bridge," Alistair said softly. He pointed to the north. "The stronghold is there, in the mountain." He pointed to the south. "The human towns are that way." He gestured to the building. "This is in between, a place for meetings, for healing, for learning, a place where our worlds can meet on neutral ground." He looked at me. "And it is a home, for you and Layla, and for me when I am not in the mountain. A home with a door that is not hidden, a home under the sun." Tears streamed down my face freely now. He had built me a home, not a cage of stone, but a promise of light, a symbol of the future he was trying to create. Layla ran ahead, laughing onto the porch. "Mama, look, there's a swing and flowers." Alistair wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. "Is it a bridge you are willing to walk, Amara, with me?" I looked at the home, at my daughter chasing a butterfly in the dewy grass, at the fierce, loyal faces of the pack members who had become my unexpected family. I looked at the man beside me, who had given me not just safety, but purpose, who saw in me a strength I was only beginning to recognize. I thought of the pull in my chest that had led him to the cave. I thought of the whistle's call I hadn't hesitated to make. Our stories were already entwined. "I'm scared," I admitted. "So am I," he said, a startling confession. "I am scared of failing my people, of not being strong enough or wise enough to bridge this gap, but I am less scared with you here." That was the truth that undid me, not grand promises of power or eternity, but a confession of shared fear and shared strength. I leaned my head against his shoulder, the stone wall cool at my back. "We'll figure it out, one day at a time." He rested his cheek against my hair, and we sat in silence.
Not the listening silence of the veil, but the comfortable quiet of two people who no longer needed words to understand. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The formal terms were offered to the Southern Pack elders. After tense negotiations, they accepted, swearing allegiance to the Northern Pact. The world beyond our mountain began to reshape itself. Layla's connection to the Heartstone became an accepted, if wondrous, fact. She would often sit near it, humming or drawing, and sometimes, if the mood struck the mountain, a wisp of light would curl around her fingers like an affectionate pet. The pack, especially the younger members, began to see her as a lucky charm, a symbol of a hopeful future. My own role evolved. I began holding informal sessions with pack members curious about the human world, and with the help of Nessa, I learned more about shifter healing. Blending their herbal lore with my modern medical knowledge, we started a true clinic within the stronghold. One evening, Alistair and I stood at the main entrance, looking out at the forest bathed in twilight. His injuries were fully healed, the last scars fading to silver lines. He was strong again, a king in full power. "Kale's trackers found Arlo," he said quietly. "He had holed up in a forgotten shrine deep in the Whispering Woods. He offered no resistance. He just looked tired." "What will happen to him?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "Exile," Alistair said, the word heavy with finality. "He will be taken far from here, to a territory with no pack, and left to live out his days alone. It is a crueler punishment for our kind than death." He sighed. "He was my teacher once. It is a loss." I threaded my fingers through his, offering silent support. We were learning that leadership meant carrying the weight of such losses. "There's something I want to show you," he said after a moment. "Tomorrow, at dawn." He wouldn't say more. The next morning, he led me, Layla, and a small guard, including Kale and Elena, out of the mountain, not on a path of escape, but on a purposeful walk. We went to a place I had never seen, a high meadow at the edge of the Whispering Woods, overlooking the valley where my old cottage lay. The rising sun painted the world in gold and pink. In the center of the meadow stood a new structure. It was not a castle or a fortress. It was a long, low building with timber and stone, with large windows and a wide porch. It looked like a lodge or a very large, elegant home. Smoke curled from a chimney. "What is this?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "A bridge," Alistair said.